Call this meeting to order. If you'd please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated. So present this evening are myself, Mayor Marl, Council Members Burgoyne, Gearbaugh, Peters, Rhodes, Roth, and Tahar. From City staff, we have City Manager Campbell, Clerk Royal, City Treasurer Bennett, Police Chief Rennick, Parks and Rec Director Scruggs, and City Superintendent Engineer Rubel. I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda as amended. I know that Mr. Burgoyne has a few things that he'd like to add to the discussion portion of the agenda this evening, but I have two things to make you aware of. The first of which will be on the consent agenda. It will be item C-13-169. It will be the Veterans Week proclamation that I'll be presenting and sharing with you all in our audience in just a moment. And then in addition to that, the verbiage for new business item 13-172 has been changed from what you would have originally received in your packet on Thursday. The new motion will read to adopt or not adopt the resolution regarding water and sewer late fees and to approve or not to approve an ordinance to amend section 94-2 of the Saline City Code and to provide clarification on utility billing, late fees, and interest charges. Okay. And Mr. Burgoyne, what were the items that you would like to add to the discussion portion of the agenda this evening?
TIFA, the gold sessions, and water and sewer.
Is everyone clear on that? If there's nothing else, I would seek a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
So move. As amended.
Okay, sorry about that.
If we're okay.
Yep, Mr. Roth, you move to approve as amended?
Yes.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Gearbaugh. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. There are no absences this evening, so we'll dispense with that. So we'll move on to the Veterans Recognition and Appreciation portion of the agenda this evening. Mr. Peters, if you come down and join me. It's on, okay. Well, first of all, good evening. I can't tell you how absolutely thrilled and delighted I am that so many community vets decided to take time out of their busy schedules and join us here this evening. I'm going to keep my remarks very brief, one, because we have many things to accomplish this evening, and two, because I'm feeling a little under the weather. But at this time, before I present a couple of things I think you're going to find pretty compelling. I'm going to turn it over to my council colleague, Mr. Peters, who has a guest here this evening, who has actually a long history of service in the city of Saline and a long history of being a real stout advocate for veterans and their interests. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Peters.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to introduce tonight Mr. Paul Schwimmer. Paul, you here? There he is. Come on, Paul. Paul is president of Arbor Land Surveying Consultants. His land survey experience spans over 45 years in Southeast Michigan. Paul is also a member of the American Legion, a lifetime member of the 101st Airborne, a life member of Special Forces Association. He became active in Saline community back in 1967 as Assistant Scoutmaster for Troop 457, and just recently stepped down as committee chairman for local Troop 446. Paul's a surveyor by occupation. He has a very interesting another interest in his life. And what he does, he takes that land surveying experience, he uses it to search for and recover the remains of World War II MIAs and POWs from battlefields around the world. So Paul goes to places like Tahiti and Australia and all other places. Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, thank you. I've been asked here to brief you on the successes of the military JPAC, which is the governmental organization that searches for our MIAs, and also of the volunteer organizations that search for and recover the remains of our boys. And I use the word boys because they were between 17 and 20 years old. To start with, 2012 has been an absolutely phenomenal year for the recovery of our GIs. It started with over in Belgium 2 weekends ago at Arlington National Cemetery. We buried Lieutenant Fenstermacher, who we recovered out of his P-47 Thunderbolt. He had crashed and embedded in his crater, was buried in somebody's front yard for the last 70 years until we recovered it in 2011. And then we screened young Mr. Fenstermacher out of his aircraft in 2012, and he was interned 2 weeks ago at an absolutely phenomenal burial at Arlington. We also have 6 boys. Let me start by saying this. In World War II, and this group is old enough that I don't have to tell you what World War II is. The younger generations, I do. In World War II, the Battle of the Bulge. The Germans did a large attack. It was snowy. We couldn't get our air support in. The boys fought in the cold. The first day that the skies cleared, America, God bless her, threw everything she could into the air. And the Germans shot down 10 of our B-26 Marauders. 9 of them had been found, and I'm very pleased to announce that in 2011 we found the Unconscious, was the name of this B-26 Marauder. We found her crater, and for the past 2 years, we and JPAC have collected the remains of the 6 boys on that aircraft. An important story on that one is to show you that people care. The living sister of the waist gunner flew from the United States, crawled through the woods to get to that aircraft because she knew that's as close to her brother as she would ever be again. So I need to jump now. I'm glad to see the Marines here. That was the European theater. I want to talk about Tarawa. Americans call it Tarawa. I used to call it Tarawa until I interviewed a World War II Marine that came in on a landing craft. He was the only boy out of 24 that made it through the shallow surf to the beach. And when I said Tarawa, he said, "Sonny," he says, "it's pronounced Tarawa." And the way you remember that is the old song, Tarara Bunktie. So when you get into that part of the region of the world, it's pronounced Tarawa. I've done 10 missions overseas. I was due to leave tomorrow to go back to Tarawa. That's been pushed back. I'm leaving on the 18th, and I'll come home. I'll miss Thanksgiving, and I'll be home the day after Thanksgiving. I want to report to you that on Tarawa, when I left in May, we were up to 54 sets of partial and complete United States Marine boys. What happened there is that the battle was so intense that they had to bury them in trenches because it was so hot. When everybody left and the grave registration people came in, they didn't know where the trenches were. So those boys, we figured there may be up to 500 still that we're looking for. They're coming home now, and it's a pretty gratifying experience. So the successes are good. We're going back. JPAC, in their Vietnam efforts, are also starting to put teams in the World War II efforts. And we just want the American people to know is that we're looking. We're still looking. The Battle of Tarawa, we lost 1,600 boys because they tried to land them when the tide was out, and they had to wade through a quarter mile of surf, and they were mowed down like cordwood. I've done diving in that area, going after the landing craft. We have an M3 tank still strapped to its landing craft in 30 feet of water. We think we have boys in there, so we're photographing that. Tarawa was the first time that pictures of the war dead were put on Time magazine, and it disturbed the Americans so much to see our boys in the surf. So in conclusion, I just got this today. I want to read this to you. This is from a survivor of Tarawa, and it's pretty important. It's why we go. I think it's one of the reasons why we go. So if you just take a minute. He pointed to a Marine lying on the pier and asked, "Know who that is?" I said I didn't. "It's the lieutenant," he said. "He's dead. The lieutenant was my best friend." That's the way it was. Everyone's best friend was lying dead, sprawled on the beach, stiffened in the water, rocking with the tide as if in a cradle. As far as you could see, men floated in the terrible stiffness of death. They were Marines. Those were our best men. They went in there with all they had, and in and in and in and in, and those that came through took that island. So that's why we go to find these boys. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, and appreciate your work on such an important, it's vitally important. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I want to begin this evening, those of you who are able, I think the least we could do is recognize all of the men and all the women in this room who have served in one capacity or another in our armed forces. Excuse me. So if you are a veteran, and again, if you are able, would you please stand and accept a round of applause from the rest of us? Thank you very much. Now, and some of you may know this, but here at the City of Saline, whoever has the distinct honor and privilege of serving as mayor gets to introduce a number of resolutions and proclamations designating certain days of the week or certain months of the year as times when we reflect and acknowledge important causes and endeavors, not only regionally but across the nation. But it was a surprise to me that nothing had ever been done to recognize Veterans Day. And I've said this before, in fact, for those of you who were at the Blue Star Memorial dedication at the library last month, we as a society don't take enough time to reflect and thank those of you who served. And so this reception and having you all here this evening and acknowledging next week as Veterans Appreciation Week is really the bare minimum, the least that we could do. But that makes it no less important. And so in my capacity as mayor, I thought it would be of vital importance that we set a precedent, and that moving forward, we continue to acknowledge that second week in November as Veterans Appreciation Week. So our city clerk, Ms. Royal, and I prepared a resolution that will be adopted, will hopefully be adopted by City Council in just a few moments. And again, the intent is that this becomes a recurring proclamation, and it will be advertised and displayed prominently as you enter City Hall on the bulletin board. I want to read it in its entirety because I think it turned out quite nice. Whereas this week will be set aside to honor and thank the men and women who fought to protect our freedoms at home and extend them abroad. Whereas we reaffirm one of our most fundamental obligations as citizens of this country, to demonstrate respect and support for those who sacrifice for peace and freedom by serving in our nation's armed forces. And whereas the City of Saline is honored to pay tribute to the fallen, the missing, the wounded, and the millions who have served, and those awaiting their return. And whereas the United States Congress has provided that November 11th of each year shall be a holiday to honor our veterans. And whereas it is appropriate to commend those individuals who have served and are currently serving in our armed forces, and to support them in all aspects. Now therefore be it resolved that I, Brian Morrow, Mayor of the City of Saline, on behalf of the citizens of the City of Saline, do hereby proclaim the week of November 11th, 2013, to be Veterans Appreciation and Recognition Week in the City of Saline, and to call upon all residents of this great city to join me in honoring these American heroes. And I set my name to this document on the 4th day of November, 2013. Secondly, Bob, why don't you come up here and join me? You know, I have a reputation in this community of coming up with good ideas. The truth is, it's other people who come up with the ideas, and I just run with them. And Bob, who's done so much for veterans in this community and across this nation, quite frankly, contacted me, I believe, in early 2013, and said, you know, there are many veterans worth singling out and recognizing, but there's one in particular in this community that I think we should take some time and honor. And I wholeheartedly agreed. And so, Bob was sort of the catalyst for this event, but more specifically for this proclamation that I'm about to read to honor George Perrault. So, George, why don't you come up here? And I'm going to read this, thank you, Bob. I'm going to read this certificate of recognition in its entirety as well. And I should preface that George has done a great deal for this community, a great deal for those who serve in our armed forces, and one proclamation could not do that justice. So we tried to touch on the biggest, the most important, and the most profound things. So, whereas George Perrault has been a resident of the Saline community since the mid-1970s, and whereas Mr. Perrault served his country honorably and with great distinction for more than 20 years, having received numerous awards and recognition. And whereas George was one of the Navy color guards guarding over President John F. Kennedy's casket in the White House Rotunda in 1963. And whereas George Perrault has been responsible for ensuring that our nation's flag is displayed year-round and prominently displayed in Saline's downtown during federal holidays. And whereas Mr. Perrault has been instrumental over the years in organizing and supporting the Saline Memorial Day Parade, as well as the ceremony at Oakwood Cemetery. And whereas George Perrault has been the chief organizer for the Washtenaw County Vietnam Veterans of America, Chapter 310, VFW Post 423, Support Our Troops, packing parties, which provide our nation's troops with much-needed materials and personal items. And finally, George exemplifies the courage and devotion of the American serviceman and continues to support his fellow servicemen and women, both active and retired. And George clearly demonstrates the principles so eloquently articulated by President John F. Kennedy. And I quote, "As we express our gratitude, we must never forget that the highest appreciation is not to utter words, but to live by them." Now, therefore, I, Brian Morrow, Mayor of the City of Saline, on behalf of the Saline City Council and citizens of Saline, do hereby thank George Perrault for his dedicated service to the City of Saline and his unwavering support for those who protect and serve our country. And I set my hand and seal to this document on the 4th day of November, 2013. George, congratulations. My friends, I'm gonna categorize this as something of a success. So I want you all to mark your calendars and come back and see us a year from now, and we'll do this all over again. Again, I want to thank those of you who took time out of your busy schedules to join us this evening. I think we have a little bit of punch left, a little bit of coffee left, and plenty of cake left. So if you'd like to take some for the road, we would welcome that and encourage you to do so. Let's give all of our veterans one more round of applause.
Thank you. Not only us veterans, but our comrade, George Perrault. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank the City of Saline for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, as the proclamation reads, thank you for protecting our freedoms at home, but also extending them abroad. I wish you all the best, and may God bless America. Thank you all. Now I think we're going to transition to our Green Thumb Awards, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct, Ms. Scruggs? So I'm going to ask Jody and a representative from the Parks Commission to come forward. And for those of you who need to leave this evening, please feel free to do so. Of course, you're welcome to stay, but council meetings can be a little dry.
Thanks. Thanks for coming, Paul. Appreciate it. Okay. Thank you very much.
Problem was, it said, "Thank you, veterans." Go on, take it. Sure. You want to stay out here? Yeah, sure. Let's fix it.
This is Lee stand down there, and I thought, no, we're all going to stand.
Yeah, why don't we? I'm just gonna sing. Golden trowel.
The golden trowel.
Oh, no, we do silver shovels?
And each
Shined up.
presentation. You want to be in on it? Or
Everybody gets a silver spade or silver trowel.
There's a lot of work that goes into this.
So, on this side,
A lot of houses and all the yards.
It was planned.
So, yeah, so just.
Thank you. Yeah, no problem. Please.
But is it a Parks Commission or is it a separate?
Oh, no, it's Parks Commission. Yeah, Parks Commission. No, it's a first you see here.
You know, 696 Castleberry didn't get on the list,
No?
but 696 Castleberry is like the outstanding Torwood
Is that right?
property.
I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
know who had the Torwood subdivision.
Who's the guy on the board from over there? Paul Portion.
Oh, Paul.
That's the one about the veteran
He lives there.
acclamation.
Yeah, I know he does.
We're going to get
He was part of the,
we're going to get going with our next award presentation, and
whatever, no.
this is our Green Thumb Award presentations. And I told all of our Green Thumb winners that the cake was for them. Kidding. The Green Thumb Award is a program that our Park Commission organizes every year. This is our 19th year for having this award program. And it's to help recognize all the citizens and businesses that take care of their gardens, plant lots of flowers, make it very beautiful for all of us to drive by a home and see some wonderful plantings. So we appreciate everyone doing that. And part of the award is to, for citizens, everyone to make nominations. What's that? Oh, okay. These aren't going to be on the overhead. So the nominations come from the citizens. This year we had 32 nominations. And our Park Commission, and I'm flanked here by our Park president, or what do you call it? The chairperson, sorry. I like to call him the president, yes. This is Greg Hohenberger, and he's our chairperson, and Sheila Burgoyne, who is one of our park commissioners, but she also spearheaded the whole program this year. So we'd like to give extra special thanks to Sheila, because it takes a lot to organize all the nominations and to send our commissioners out to grab photos and to put the yard signs out and whatnot. So it's a big deal. This year we had 32 nominations. Extremely hard to narrow this down to just a handful of award winners. But we would like to make the presentations for our residential award winners first. The most colorful yard this year was given to Marla Lemlin. And if she would come up, and we'll give her award. Greg, will you come take a photo? Want to do a photo op? Excellent. Thank you, Marla. And the next award winner is our best overall yard. That goes to Linda Miner. Get our photo ops going. Okay. The next award is the most whimsical yard, which it goes to Jill Lawrence. She would come up. paparazzi needs your photos. Everyone all set? Okay. And then the Best Yard Art Award goes to the Douthits. So Jim and Margot. Jim, get in there. We need your picture real quick. Okay. And the final residential winner is the Best Compact Garden in Small Yards. And it goes to the resident of 266 North Maple. We were unable to get a name, but we were hoping maybe they would show up tonight, so I'm thinking not. But their award will be will be given to them, delivered. Okay, and then the business award this year goes to Capital Management, Tom Bauman, right downtown Saline. Congratulations. Let's get a picture with everyone. Thank you. And that concludes our ceremony. And we would like to thank everyone for all the nominations and our award winners. You have beautiful gardens, and it really made Saline a much nicer place to look. And I know that Sheila would like to say a few words.
I went around and put signs in people's yards and got to meet a number of people. And the greatest pleasure was just to be able to go into people's yards and see what they had done. And I really gained an appreciation for the gardeners of Saline, the people who really spend the time and put the care into growing beautiful, interesting gardens. Along the way, I really enjoyed Jill's yard because she has all sorts of little dog and cat and bird motifs that I didn't quite notice just walking by or driving by, but when I went up and saw them, I was really sort of enchanted by them. And Jim and Margot have a beautiful yard, but they go around and rebuild old pumps and paint them and put them in their yard. And that was really, I really enjoyed seeing those and you showing them to me. And I didn't get a chance to visit every yard, but I saw a lot of them. And it was really a pleasure to be involved in this program. And
You did a great job.
Well, thank you.
Made us all look good.
Thank you.
Good. Well, again, congratulations to all the award recipients, and a special thanks to our Parks and Rec staff and our Parks Commission, specifically Mrs. Burgoyne for leading the Green Thumb initiative this year. Thank you all. We move on now to citizen comments on agenda items. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time and make comment or question on an item that appears on this agenda. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested, but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Are there any citizen comments? No? Okay. Then we move on to the consent agenda. The following consent agenda will normally be adopted without discussion. However, at the request of any citizen or council member, any item may be removed from the consent agenda for council discussion. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended?
Move to approve.
Been moved to approve by Mr. Burgoyne. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Peters. Hearing no discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. Moving on to new business, item 13-172. This is utility bill penalty and interest. This will be a motion to approve, or this will be a motion to adopt or not adopt the resolution regarding water and sewer late fees, and to approve or not to approve an ordinance to amend section 94-2 of the Saline City Code to provide clarification on utility billing late fees and interest charges. Is there a motion?
Move to adopt and approve.
Been moved by Rhodes to adopt and approve. Is there a second?
A second.
Seconded by Mr. Roth. Ms. Bennett, do you care to come up and make maybe a brief statement about this issue? I know we've discussed it at 2 work meetings, but
Yeah,
for the,
as the council may recall, we have revised and revisited the policy that had not ever been really formally adopted. And this action tonight will adopt a resolution and a policy for the late fees that are assessed on the utility bills. This is pertaining just to utility bills that are billed quarterly. And what this policy would do is allow for the 10% penalty to be assessed, and then clarification as when the 0.75% interest is assessed. And then if there is a written request provided to the treasurer's office upon full payment of the bill, there can be a one-time per the life of an account waiver of that late fee, provided that the bill is paid in full and that they make the request in writing.
very good. Thank you, Ms. Bennett. Are there any questions for Ms. Bennett? Mr. Peters?
Just a comment. I know that Treasurer Bennett and I talked about this earlier. If we send out reminders to email payers, maybe if we have some problems in the future, it might help if we send out reminders, traditional mail too, see how it goes.
And that is a good point to make. If the residents are signed up to receive their bill online or even to get email notifications, there are 3, I think there's only 3. Sometimes I think there's more. But there are a number of reminders that go out to the person, reminding them that the bill is due, because there are circumstances, that go out. And ideally, when we become a paperless, that would be the most cost-effective way to send a notice to the people.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. Mr. Gearbox?
Just real quick, I think there's a word error in section 1 of C, or section C, where it indicates transfer delinquent amounts to this county with delinquent. I think it should be the county.
Yes, thank you.
That'll be changed without objection, Mr. Gearbox. Thank you for bringing it to our attention. Do you have a follow-up question, Mr. Gearbox?
Nope.
No? Okay. Anything else for Ms. Bennett? Ms. Bennett, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Any subsequent discussion? I would just say that this is a good policy change. As I mentioned earlier, the council as a body has discussed this issue, debated it and researched it on multiple occasions, and we had 2 very productive work meetings on this subject. To reiterate, this is a good policy change, especially from the customer's perspective. And I just want to thank everybody for being so willing and engaged as this process moved along. So thank you all. If there's nothing further, then it's been properly moved and seconded to adopt and to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. Moving on to new business item 13-171. This is Ethan Savage Eagle Scout Project. This will be a motion to approve or not to approve the Eagle Scout project of Ethan Savage for the creation of a trail map, trail marker, and 2 benches at Wilderness Park. Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved by Rhodes, seconded by Gearbox to approve. I'll turn it over to our Parks and Rec Director, Mrs. Scruggs. Miss Scruggs, excuse me.
Actually, we're going to get this up on the document cam. We have a visual for you, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ethan so he can give his presentation. He made the same presentation to the Park Commission last month, and the Park Commission likes the project and is recommending City Council approve it as well.
All right, hello, I'm Ethan Savage. I have some papers, if you that describe how my meeting or how my project will be.
You can just give them all to Mr. Roth, Ethan, and we'll pass them down for you.
Oh, you already have?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
We already got it.
So my project mainly takes place in Wilderness Park, which is off Willis Road, if you're familiar with it. There's 3 main portions to it. There's the map portion, which involves recreating the current map at Wilderness Park, which has become faded with age, and the trails are no longer current. So up here you see, basically, I ran through the trails with the GPS, and I just recorded where all the trails actually are, and I'm going to have a local graphic designer recreate the map and basically with the updated trails and trail markers. The second portion of my project will be putting in 10 new trail markers signified by the yellow dots on the map. Those trail markers will be chiseled in with the trails A, B, and C in the respective color, painted with acrylic paints and appropriately sealed to last a while exteriorly. And the third portion of my project will be creating 2 benches. You can't really see it on the map very well, but they're at the bottom of both loops. They're sort of a brown rectangle. And basically, I have the plans for the bench in my binder here, and I can pass that around or put it up there, maybe. All right. So I'll just go into the benches first. That's how I'm going to be creating the benches. They're going to be there's going to be a 4-foot 4x4 post under all that 4 times with a foundation of an 8-inch centimeter foundation of cement to basically keep it secure and make it last a while. And all this will be pressure treated lumber. And there's a supply list that I have over here. You can't see anything, but it's all there. I found this plan and I've recorded all the data, and it seems to be within the budget I've allotted for it. And it seems to be a good bench design. So that's what I plan on doing. The first portion, or the second portion, the trail markers, they're basically going to be 4x4x6 posts put into the ground at 42 inches below the ground to abide by the frost line regulations, as well as with an 8-inch diameter foundation of cement, similar to the benches. At the top of each sign, it's going to be cut off at a 45-degree angle, and there's going to be a Dremel, and we're going to be dremeling the letters A, B, and C, as well as an arrow indicating the direction that the trail is going. Within each directional arrow in the letter, there's going to be acrylic paint with oil-based primers and an acrylic exterior varnish to keep the paint lasting for a long time. The edges will be sanded to prevent any accidental injuries, so that's always good. I touched on the map. I can go into more detail if anybody has any questions on it.
Any questions for Ethan? No? Okay.
No? All right. Initial estimates are going to be around $650, not accounting for things I already own, like shovels, stuff like that. So once I factor in all that, I estimate it to be a lot less than that. And funding's within my grasp.
Thank you. Any questions? Ethan, appreciate it very much. Thank you for your willingness. First of all, thank you for your attendance here this evening, but also for your willingness to improve Wilderness Park. Ms. Scruggs, do you have any additional comments?
I don't. This is a project initially taken on, I believe, in 1999 by another Eagle, and they created a lot of the trails and markers, and over the years they've disappeared or faded or whatnot, and redoing the display and remarking everything, it's well needed. So very appreciative of Ethan in this project.
Absolutely. Thank you. Are there any additional comments or discussion? No? That's been properly moved by Rhodes, seconded by Gearbaugh to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. Ethan, again, thank you for being here. Appreciate it very much. We move on now to new business item 13-174. This is traffic control orders. This will be a motion to adopt or not adopt traffic control order number 2287 for the 100 block of South Ann Arbor Street, west side of the street. Be designated no commercial parking loading zone from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. to 6 p.m., a 30-minute limit. Is there a motion?
Move to adopt.
It's been moved by Gearbaugh to adopt. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Roth. Chief Rennick, do you care to come up and
Only if somebody has some questions.
Okay. There are questions for Chief Rennick? I just had a couple, and I articulated one of them to Mr. Campbell before the meeting this evening, and I apologize that I didn't get to you to talk about it directly. Will you be doubling back to all of the business owners in that vicinity to notify them of the change?
Yes, before the new signs will be placed in, up, all those people that are listed in the original memo will be contacted.
Very good. And then just not really a question, but more of a comment, really, just something to be cognizant of, and I'd maybe like a report or acknowledgement of this in maybe 2-3 months. But one of the issues that I have in a variety of places, but not the least of which in that spot, would be enforcement. And so if we are going to limit it to 30 minutes, per individual, I want to make sure that we're enforcing that policy, that ordinance. So if that proves problematic, or you feel that that's not happening, I would be interested in hearing some of your thoughts on how best to move forward. But again, that's not really a question, just more of a comment, something to be cognizant of.
Okay.
Thank you. Anything else for the chief? Ms. Tahar?
Yes, just a question, my own lack of experience with parking downtown since I usually walk. So what happens between 11 and 1? Is that then understood to be a no parking zone, or?
Right. That will be a no parking zone at that point. And the reason that this came about is the complaint from Benito's, and after looking into it, I could see that a semi pulled up in front of that building during their busiest time, which would be the lunch hour, had some problems, and I know they've at least talked about the idea of having some outdoor seating for next year, and nobody's going to want to sit there on the sidewalk with a semi park next to them. So when I talked to them about this idea of could we create a window of opportunity in there where people could sit down and have their pizza if they so chose and not have trucks pull up in front, it was agreeable to them as well as the other businesses.
Thanks.
Additional questions or comments? No? Chief, thank you very much.
Thank you.
If there's nothing further, then it's been properly moved by Gearboss, seconded by Roth to adopt. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Moving on to new business item 13-175. This is wastewater treatment plant improvement payment number 1. This will be a motion to approve or not approve the Saline wastewater treatment plant improvement contractor's application for payment number 1 in the amount of $280,734.30. Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Moved by Peters to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Tahar. Mr. Rubel, do you care to comment at all?
Just briefly, Mayor, I attached a photo page to show or demonstrate some of the progress items. Several of the items on the first pay estimate are materials installed, and some are materials that have equipment ordered and on-site, and in accordance with the contract documents, they're paid a percentage of the value of the stuff they purchased, and then the remainder of it after it's been installed. So the first change order involves the payment of the $280,000 of the $1,276,000 value of the entire contract. Mr. Brian Rubel of Tetra Tech did mention there's ongoing work on a change order that has 3 or 4 items attached to it that's been in the works for some time. Hopefully that'll come before council at one of the next 2 meetings, and then we can discuss that at that time.
Very good. Mr. Rubel. Mr. Gearbox.
Just regarding those items that are changing, were those things we were anticipating as a result of what we discovered, or just a redesign now at this point?
Well, I mean, one, there's a couple I think that just substitutes, alternatives,
Okay.
and then one of them was in addition to the piping and digester, and one is we decided to relocate the gas burner, the waste gas that gets burned off, not reused it, because we wanted to move it away from the gate and the prospective location of the entrance for the new Salt Springs Park. So we were able to find a better location for it and waiting for DEQ to give final approval on that permit-wise.
Okay.
And then if there was any cost associated with it, that would be negotiated with the contractor. And there was one that was a cost savings measure of the tube, the digester tube, the outside tube being abandoned in place versus the costly excavation and removal. So we'll see how it balances out once we get the change order.
Okay, but nothing super major that we're
I don't think so.
Okay, thanks.
Additional questions for Mr. Rubel? No? Mr. Rubel, thank you. Appreciate it. Any additional discussion? No? Okay. This is an important first step. It's been properly moved by Peters, seconded by Tahar to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. Moving on to new business item 13-176. This is raffle license, Saline Varsity Blues. This will be a motion to approve or not to approve the raffle license request from Saline Varsity Blues for 2 events, one in December and one in February. Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Moved by Gearbaugh to approve. Is there a second?
I second.
Seconded by Mr. Roth. I know that the memorandum or letter that was submitted was from Mrs. April Scarlett, and I don't believe that she is here. Is there anyone here representing Saline Varsity Blues this evening? No? Okay. Any discussion or questions? Mr. Roth?
I just have a question why it's appearing to us. We usually don't see something like this coming in front of us. And I was just wondering what their legal address is, if it's where the high school address is or if it's at Liberty School, since that's where the district office is located. I'm just wondering why it's coming in front of us. I usually never see anything like this. It's handled right straight through the police department.
Oh, well, that may be my mistake, because I was under the impression that all raffling items came before council, and it's where the person lives, the person who's pulling or where the 501c is, their address is where they have to apply for that from. So if I lived in Tecumseh, I would have to go to Tecumseh even if I was doing it for Saline.
Well, it might be address, Saline, but
Right.
I'm just curious that it appeared on our agenda, where in the past I've known it going through the police department and never met the council.
Generally, the standard has been that raffles are received through the clerk's office and then are approved by city council. I can't, to be completely candid with you, Mr. Roth, I can't recall the last time someone petitioned us for a raffle license, so it's been a number of years, but it is the custom and standard that they do appear on a council agenda for action.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Additional comments or questions? No, that's been moved by Gearboss, seconded by Roth to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. We move on to the discussion portion of the agenda this evening. Commission, committee, or task force reports from council members. Mr. Gearbaugh.
Just a little follow-up on the task force for the LDFA and TIFA. We basically have gotten together and come up with some recommendations that will be being presented to the actual TIFA board, and then those recommendations will probably be referred back to council for consideration and such. Generally, it was looking at revamping our current pamphlet and such that we hand out for businesses and things in coordination with Main Street and the Chamber and all that organization, and then some of the other aspects of some of the projects and ideas that may potentially be worthwhile looking into and funding in terms of economic development in the uptown and in the industrial parks. The other one, Planning Commission, not Planning Commission, I'm sorry, the task force for the Rec Center has met, and we will be bringing forward information on that shortly, and I think Mr. Morrow, the mayor, will have more information on that because I was unable to attend the meeting, or actually I missed the meeting, sorry, on last Wednesday.
Thank you, Mr. Gearbaugh. Yes, I met with City Manager Campbell, Ms. Lambert from Saline Parks and Rec, and Ms. Scruggs today. That report is being finalized and will probably be emailed out to council in advance of our next meeting. I anticipate either late this week or early next week with an invitation to call or meet with Ms. Scruggs if council members have questions or concerns. The report is going to be very similar, although not identical, to the presentation report that was received about a month and a half ago. So please be on the lookout for it, and it'll probably be up for debate, consideration, discussion, and hopefully adoption at one of our subsequent council meetings. Thank you, Mr. Gearbaugh. Mr. Rhodes?
Just wanted to report that the first batch of hard copy printout from the Residential Support Services Task Force had been distributed to the Saline area social services offices, and I received another batch this evening that I'll take over to probably Saline Area Senior Center. Thank you, Mickey Joe.
Thank you. Additional Commissioner Committee reports. Mr. Peters.
Just real quick to say congratulations to all the Green Thumb Awards. That's a lot of work, those beautiful gardens. It really is. And secondly, I was talking with the city manager, Mr. Campbell, the other day about the Huron Valley Archaeological Society visiting the Salt Springs Park and doing a bit of a walkthrough and maybe taking a spade and turning over a couple of rocks or something like that. They want to take a look for any kind of sensitive areas before we put in some trails, see maybe there might be some old fire pits or something of archaeological value. So in case anybody has any comments or concerns about that, let me know, but I think it's pretty benign effort. That'll probably happen sometime this month.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. Any other Commissioner Committee reports? I just have two things to acknowledge. The first of which is we do have a vacancy now on our EDC and TIFA boards. The resignation was from a individual, actually it was a really outstanding member of that board, who formerly worked at Forcia. And so if there's somebody who is interested in serving in that capacity, we are accepting applications. The clerk's office specifically is accepting applications. And ideally, we'd like to find somebody who's associated or employed with one of our larger employers within one of our industrial parks. So if, and of course they need to live in the community. So if council members have ideas or thoughts, please share them with me, or please directly solicit or encourage individuals to apply. But again, there are vacancies right now on EDC and TIFA. And I've also been informed by the assessor's office that there is still an outstanding vacancy on the tax board. It's not a regular voting position, it's the alternate, but we would like to have that filled in the next month or so. So if you're interested in serving in that capacity, the clerk's office is also taking applications for that vacancy as well. Okay. We move on to reports and other announcements. No? Okay.
Yeah, I got one.
Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry, Mr. Roth.
I just want to remind folks that I received information regarding a Veterans Day or Veterans concert going on at the Saline Middle School Auditorium this Sunday, the 10th, at 4 p.m.
Thank you, Mr. Roth, for sharing that. I apologize. I was going to bring that up as well. That's 4 p.m. at the middle school, and it features, I believe, a choir and the Saline New Horizons band.
Right, the choirs from Ypsilanti.
Okay. They did something similar last year, and it was a very, very nice event. So encourage everyone to attend if their schedule permits. Are there any other reports or announcements? No, then we move on to the recommendation from the Healthcare Committee. Mr. Campbell, can I turn it over to you?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You have before you in your places here at the dais information from the Employee Healthcare Committee regarding the healthcare renewal that would begin January 1st, 2014. As in the past, we've done work sessions, and we can certainly do that again if you all would like us to do that. However, we wanted the amount of changes that we're proposing it's very similar to last year, so a little bit different from years past where we've had lots of concessions and changes. But in any case, we're presenting this information to you now, and there's, of course, my cover memo, a memo from City Treasurer Mickey Jo Bennett, and then also one from Capnick Insurance, our third-party administrator, with more of the details of the proposals. What I'd like to suggest is for council members to take this information, review it, and if you would all like to see a work session, if those that would like to do that, to contact the mayor by Tuesday the 12th. Normally I would say Monday, but since Monday will be closed because of Veterans Day, so it's what I would just very briefly want to add is that we are now, what I would say truly with the new collective bargaining agreement language, we are truly across the board, whether you union, non-union. So part of that, to allow that to happen, were two things. Of course, the Affordable Care Act, as well as the recent collective bargaining negotiations that were ratified with police. So I think it's certainly a move in the right direction, and I mean, it was a good, we had, I think, 3 or 4 overall committee meetings, as well as employee interaction to talk about with our employee groups, the respective employee groups that we represent, and talking about letting them know what the committee was looking at to recommend. And so what you have before you are the results of those meetings. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Mr. Burgoyne.
In the memo where second paragraph talks about 5 options currently available. So then the first option is Simply Blue PPO 3,000, 6,000, 100% coverage. And the second option is Simply Blue PPO 3,000, 6,000, 80% coverage. Is that a typo, or are those actually the options?
No, those are actually the options.
So one group is getting 80% and one group is getting 100% coverage?
Those are options, and it's basically it's based on the hard cap. So based on the hard cap, that's a recommendation, of course, is the hard cap. That's what the city council has adopted the last 2 years, and we were recommending for a third. And so that limits the amount of money that the city can pay towards an employee's health insurance. And so regardless of the plan option, it's still only eligible for X amount of dollars.
So the individual's premiums are different in those 2 cases?
That's correct.
First 2 cases.
That's correct.
Any other questions for Mr. Campbell? Okay. Please take a look over it, and if you, obviously, if you have any questions, you're welcome to direct those to Mr. Campbell. He'd be happy to connect with you over the phone, email, or sit down face-to-face. Or if you think that there's merit in having a work meeting, please let me know that as well. If that's the will of the majority of council, we can certainly do that. Mr. Gearbaugh.
Right now, I would recommend a short meeting, just a half hour or something beforehand to go over this, because I've got some other questions that I'd like to ask about this at that point.
Okay. Mr. Roth, do you have an opinion on that?
I didn't have a chance to study the whole thing.
Okay, all right. Mr. Rhodes, do you have any thoughts on that initially?
Not yet.
Okay. Ms. Tahar? Not yet?
Not yet,
Okay.
sorry.
Mr. Peters?
No.
No, okay. Mr. Burgoyne? Okay, we'll take a look at it and let me know. That's sort of 1 in favor at the moment. If you could do that sooner as opposed to later, that would be appreciated. If we do have a work meeting, I think as Mr. Gearbaugh just mentioned, I don't think it needs to be a lengthy one. It could probably be about a half hour, 45 minutes. But please do take a look at that, and if that is your intent, or that's your desire, excuse me, please let me know. Okay? We move on now to the, unless there's anything further on the recommendation from the Healthcare Committee. No? Then we move on to the quarterly 2014 strategic report. I'll hand it over to Mr. Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Try and cover this briefly and certainly go into as much detail as council would like. But this is the result of the measures that were put in place by City Council regarding the fiscal year 14 strategic plan. And so, as you can see in the red, those are the results of the measures for the first quarter. And so, as I said, mentioned, happy to go into as much detail as you would like. I mean, we can certainly go through each one, or if there's, do our best to answer any questions if anybody had any questions.
Any questions, Mr. Rhodes?
Just wondering what the actual date was of this report, because there's some areas where they talk about things that have been done in October and other areas where it talks about things yet to be done in September. So I'm a bit confused.
Well, this was done actually, I think it was due the week before the last meeting. So it was after the first, it included all the way through September. So July, August, September, the first quarter. So I apologize for any confusion on that.
Clean it up.
Yeah, we can certainly clean it up and make
Talk with
those
you later
changes.
about that.
Sure.
If you'd let staff know about the areas that need need some finessing, Mr. Rhodes, we'll get that corrected and get a revised document out probably at the next council meeting. That shouldn't be a problem. Additional comments? No? Okay. Then we move on to the SAW grant application resolution. I know that, Todd, did you want to talk about this? You want to turn over to Mr. Rubel? Yep, Gary? Okay. Ms. Bennett might not comment too, I don't know. Ms. Bennett, if you'd like to comment too, following Mr. Rubel, we would welcome that. I'm sorry,
As,
Mr. Rubel.
as a follow-up to the council approval of the hiring of Tetra Tech to complete the SAW grant application, we had a staff meeting on October 30th, very productive. This has been on the fast track, since we heard that the state was offering 90% funding through a SAW grant to establish an asset management program. Mr. Brian Rubel had presented us with a draft letter here dated October 31 that explains some of the details of the scope of work, sort of fleshes out some of the ideas we talked about when we awarded the proposal for back on September 30th. And subsequent to that, there's a handout on your desk, on your table, that sort of is a little more clear presentation of the information on the last 2 pages from Mr. Rubel's memo. And then what it does, it shows the cost of the major categories, and then it splits out between stormwater and wastewater, 2 different cost centers, of course. One's enterprise fund, one's general fund. And then it also displays in tabular form the in-house contributions, which can be considered as participating contributions to the funding of our 10% participation, which further lowers our committed cost out of pocket. So hopefully we'll get everything in on time. I think Mr. Rubel is shooting for November 20th submittal at the latest, if everything goes right and is executed properly. And then it'll get in the quay for consideration by the DEQ for award, hopefully next year, if not, maybe the subsequent year, whenever they refund, or if they refund the SAW grant monies. And so we'll continue to work with them. We'll review the final application when it comes in, and then, of course, Mr. Rubel will be here at the next council meeting, and there'll be a request there is noted to that the council can accept and set the platitude there of the grant amount, and also designate City Manager Campbell as the authorized representative. That'll put everything else in motion to submittal of the application to the DEQ.
Ms. Bennett, do you care to make a comment?
The only additional comment that I would make, just to kind of help council remember, as you may recall, Mr. Rubel and Mr. Rubel, Tetra Tech and the city we did have a work meeting some while back, and we were discussing how we could use this money. And the memo that is attached that has the scope of services, those Brian Rubel met with, I think Gary, Jeff, and Bob individually, met with all of them about the projects that could be included in there, and then met with Joanne and myself and Gary. And so this is a list of the work. At the meeting, when we had the work meeting, there were some discussions about what could be covered and what couldn't be covered. So this is a detailed, I think it's a very good detailed list of the work that would be done and the stuff that could be included under that project. The resolution does have to be verbatim. Would be submitted on the November 18th. So if you have any questions or anything that needs to be cleared up, we do encourage you to get with Gary or Todd so that on November 18th, because we have to have this filed by December 1st to meet the deadline. So please review it. If you have any questions, let staff know.
Yeah, just so there's no ambiguity, I just want to underscore that point that Ms. Bennett just articulated. The resolution has, the language that has been submitted, unless we as a council want to make changes, has to be approved at our next council meeting. So there is a timing issue. So again, if you do have questions or concerns or thoughts, please direct them to Mr. Rubel or Mr. Campbell. Mr. Burgoyne.
My understanding on the stormwater was that communities with a population of under $10,000 did not have to start that type of project. We're not required to do it.
You mean 10,000 people?
10,000 people.
Okay.
I said dollars?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's right.
I was looking at the $400,000. So, if we're able to get 90% funds and do an inventory, and that's useful for us, and we have no further requirement because we take these funds, then that may be well and good. If we take these funds for stormwater, are we obligated in some way to continue annual costs of some kind?
I think Mr. Rule briefed a little bit on that at a prior meeting. And then I think there is some mechanism where we sort of indicate that we're going to have some good practices, good maintenance practices and follow-up. You know, we're required to do asset management on our streets. That was many years ago. And then we're also required through MDOT and Watts and others to do updates on that. You know, but I don't think we're committed to spending any more money than we would have allocated in our capital improvement plan, because capital improvement plan and future projects are part of the asset management system. So we basically control what we decide improvements are needed, when they're needed, you know, judge their priority and so forth, and the funding. The program that was outlined here in detail is actually fashioned particularly for our needs, both in the stormwater management and the sewer and the wastewater plant and its current conditions and deficiencies. So, and it'll all be blended with the water and rate sewer study and the capital improvement plan, so that we have a holistic and very like a symbiotic relationship between all of those and work well together. Help us guide us through the budget process so when any one decision will enhance the others.
But the stormwater, taking this money, does not cause a future requirement to us, right?
We'll verify that with Tetra Tech.
Okay.
And we'll have that.
I just want to be sure.
Yeah, right.
That's a good question.
Yeah, we'll have that first, we'll have that by the next.
It's good to have information. I mean,
Right.
this looks quite good. We're getting 90% funds. That looks good.
Right, we are a stormwater phase 2 community, so we are committed to the state, through the federal EPA, to manage our stormwater system, especially the Yellow Falls.
We're fewer than 10,000 population, so
No, but we're stormwater phase 2 because we're drawn in by the urban area of Ann Arbor.
Do additional questions, Mr. Burgoyne?
No.
No? Okay. Mr. Rhodes, and then we'll get to Mr. Roth.
Yeah, thank you. One comment, one question. On under section 1F, storm sewer system, talks about a model that would simulate rainstorms, perhaps the 10-year storm. And given the heavy rainfalls that we've experienced recently in this area, I don't think that using the 10-year criteria will be adequate. I'd like to see 50, and maybe it even needs to be a 100-year storm. I don't know. Something more than 10 anyway.
Right. One of the work scope items and accomplishments will be, right now we have a GIS mapping system. It's just one-dimensional. It just shows horizontal locations on a street. However, when you do the monitoring, you take in consideration the sizes, the elevations, the slopes, and when you put it into what's called a swim model on the computer, will generate you what the capacities are of those storm sewers. You will know your weak points. And then what you're going to design for is removing the weak points of the system, and so that you don't have bottlenecks, backups in certain locations. And then you design for whatever your own system causes you to have limitations or allowances.
And I agree with all that, and it just sort of reinforces my feeling that it ought to be something more than a 10-year rainfall. And then the question that I had was, since this is a grant request, but we're being asked, or will be asked at our next meeting to sign the proposal from Tetra Tech, what happens if we don't get the grant? Are we still obligated to pay Tetra Tech close to $1 million?
No, we won't proceed with any of these options, any of these work plan items until we receive the grant.
Okay.
Right now, the DEQ just wants to see the grant, the value of the grant, so they can perform their own evaluation of it. Of course, the system of selecting who obtains the grants within all the communities that submit in the first round. There's always a chance to get it on the second round. You know, it's to our benefit to earn it or win it, get awarded either this year or next year, and then the state will pay 90% of the cost of everything involved.
But none of the work will be done until we're
Right.
notified that we're getting the grant, so there won't be any additional cost incurred by Tetra Tech.
I didn't notice in their proposal that they're asking us to sign that it was dependent upon receipt of the SAW grant. So I just wanted to make sure we're not obligating ourselves in any case.
Verify that also.
That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. Mr. Roth?
I had the same question, that question number 2 that Mr. Rhodes had, but I have some additional questions along with it. Are we obligated to engage Tetra Tech in doing all these tasks? Or do we have an opportunity to do some competitive bidding to come in maybe a lower price?
Well,
it appears since they apply for the grant, we are obligated, we feel a sense of obligation to engage them in doing all the work, and they would be looking at doing all the future work.
At this point, they're only engaged to submit the grant. That's it.
And what fee for us?
The $6,000 that was approved at the last council meeting.
Okay, now you mentioned something about the sewer, the water study and so on. Was that part of that $6,000 or is this separate?
No, that was approved actually, a SAW grant was approved 2 council meetings ago. The water and sewer grant was approved at the last council meeting. $19,900.
Well, what I'm getting at, because it appears almost every year we're doing some studies. Why do we need so many studies? Because the one completed last year is supposed to go up to 2018, 17 or 18.
Which study is that?
It was a rate study that was conducted last year on water.
I don't recall a rate study last year. Last one was done at least 5 years ago.
Okay, I just went through some notes that I had and agendas for meetings, and that's where I came up with that concept.
We did have a discussion earlier this year in reference to whether we were going to prolong the rate study, which we were scheduled to have a rate study, and we delayed it for a year. There was some discussion about that earlier, I want to say back in February, so that may be the notes you came across. And then part of this proposal that Tetra Tech is doing is that after we do a rate study with Tetra Tech, they are going to provide the rate, an analysis software basically to our staff so that we can review it and analyze it in-house on an annual basis. So there's going to be included in that cost that we approved at the last meeting, that will be something that will be done now by staff moving forward.
So the stuff that we approved back in February, nothing's happened with it?
What we approved back in February was to prolong the rate study for another year. And we have prolonged that. And now, and we were going to let it go for another year, but because of the SAW grant application being in the requirement of it, it makes sense to do it and have the state of Michigan reimburse us 90%. So nothing happened in February other than we were going to prolong a rate study, and now we're getting closer to that rate study, and since we have this grant application, it makes sense to have the grant pay 90% of the rate study. There wasn't one done earlier, we delayed it.
Additional questions? Mr. Gearbaugh?
Can you clarify on the GSI software and hardware? I saw there was like $85,000 in the grant. This isn't something that we could work with the county, or is this going to specifically be for us as a city? I'm looking at, usually when you submit a grant, you put everything in there. Now, the likelihood of this being put in place and everything, and then to have the individuals that can support it and do all of that, does Tetra Tech see that as being something we can handle, or is this something that would have to be an ongoing?
They currently, they did assemble the GIS system many years ago for the street system. That also included water and sewer lines. This takes it to the level where they convert it into looking at the elevations, the conditions, the capacities, the depths, the sizes. So it raises the current GIS system, ArcView, to the next level for our use, for our DPW to use.
It adds a number of layers, and that was one of the questions we discussed at the meeting, is there's an annual cost to support that software. And that annual cost would be depending on at what level it is, if it'll be in-house or continue to be supported by Tetra Tech or a similar firm.
Okay.
At this time, it is supported annually by Tetra Tech.
Yeah, and that's why I was trying to see where $85,000 a year, that's a significant cost that if we had to incur every year after that.
No. That's
just the initial.
That's for the mapping of all of
Right.
the storm sewers and all of the sanitary and all of that. That's just the mapping, and then in getting it in there. There will be an additional cost, and there is every year for the software.
Yeah, because I see there's basically $260,000 identified for system inventory, which says entry of data into GIS and surveying, but then it says actually purchasing the software and hardware for another $85,000.
Which, if we decide to purchase it and have it in-house, that would be the training and stuff like that too. The discussion was had at the meeting that we wanted to put, everything that is possible out there.
Right, and that's why I wanted to make
include it
sure.
in the grant.
Okay, because there may be potentially come out that we may not want to go that route.
Very,
Okay, got it.
yes.
When we do meet to go over some specifics on the extent of developing the program to look at capacities, we already know that there are some areas that we're going to concentrate on, areas of potential growth, and to sort of predict that we do have capacity for developments on vacant lands and maybe redevelopments, and that will not only encourage development, but that'll help us obtain the DEQ permits for connections.
As long as we're not shifting the costs that would belong to a developer onto the city through this grant,
Right.
that's more of my concern too. So, okay, thank you.
Are there additional questions? Well, let me just add this. It appears that the questions and concerns that council members have had have been answered and alleviated this evening. However, if council would like to have a work meeting on this issue prior to our regular meeting at 7:30 in 2 weeks, that would be fine. I don't think it's necessary, but it's, as you know, it's not all about me. And so if the majority feels it would be appropriate and prudent to meet about this issue and discuss it one last time before we take action on it, I'm happy to do that. So I'm interested in if there's a consensus from council.
I would say I'm ready to go forward with this.
Ready?
Most of
Okay.
my questions were answered.
Mr. Roth, you? Go forward. Okay. Mr. Rhodes?
Yeah, I'd like to see any changes, though, a little bit further in advance than our normal council packet.
Ms. Bennett, you wrote down a couple questions that council members have. When you get the answers to those, which I would assume would be maybe by the end of this week, could you email those out?
Yep.
Okay,
Most
very good.
certainly.
Ms. Tahar?
Yes, ready to move
Okay.
forward.
Mr. Peters?
Yeah, I think we're ready.
Mr. Burgoyne? Okay, very good. Is there any further questions? No? Thank you both. Appreciate it. We move on to a discussion item that Mr. Burgoyne added this evening. Tifa, Mr. Burgoyne?
Yeah, Mr. Garba talked about projects and budget and so forth. And the TIFA plan points to doing the essential services first, which are water and sewer and streets. And in the current year TIFA budget, this year and next year, the current allocation in there is not sufficient to cover North Ann Arbor Street. That takes the money from street funds, a general fund supported fund. So, and I asked this question before, how is that going to be handled so that TIFA pays for its own projects? Has that been looked at? Is there going to be reallocation or scheduling to make that? It's obviously possible. I looked at the items in there. It's possible to schedule it.
It's possible to do it, but I'm not sure why, because actually, I know what you're concerned about is basically making that idea that everything's paid out of it, but we don't necessarily always do projects that we would charge to TIFA from TIFA. We've done stuff in general fund, used general fund dollars that we could have actually expended those in TIFA, and we chose not to. So I know what you're saying, but it's coming out of two buckets that are restricted. One is major streets and one is restricted in the Tifa district within that. So this idea that we would forego a project in Tifa and not use the dollars in the street fund, I'm trying to figure out where we would have that problem. Because, I mean, we know the funds over here are restricted. We know the funds over here are restricted. I know this idea that they're cheaper dollars in Tifa, but we always are foregoing something in Tifa for not doing it there if we don't have sufficient funds to do it there. We may have funds come out of the general funds, or we may get a grant somewhere else or something else. So the way that I thought we were looking at it is basically spending out of all the buckets that are available, and potentially the North Ann Arbor Street, because the funds are available in streetscape, we're using that for a major street, which seems appropriate. Mr. Campbell maybe can address that better, but I'm just looking at it from that perspective. I've never had the policy that always said that everything must be paid out of Tifa if it's in the Tifa district. It may have been a practice, but it never was a policy that I understood.
Well, it's the plan, the Tifa plan and the LDFA plans say what will be done. And in the plans, it says that infrastructure will be done. I mean, the basic.
Right.
And beyond infrastructure, then you have discretionary items.
But we could have done more infrastructure in the past years, and I think that we actually have. And we've done things that probably could have been put aside and not done necessarily to improve parks, trails, and all that type of thing. So I'm not sure when we forego things.
Parks and trails and other discretionary items are not basic infrastructure. Basic infrastructure is water, sewer, roads.
But couldn't we have done larger portions of some of our bigger infrastructure aspects instead of doing the roads and or doing trails and such? That's what I'm saying, that in the past, I think there may have been extra, we could have done larger portions of some of that stuff, but we forego doing that so that we could do parks or do trails or some other aspects. I just don't remember where we've actually done that, where we could have foregone on some aspects and done more money towards some of the infrastructure because it was actually in the parks. I know we always came up with a percentage, but I never knew exactly how you calculated those percentages.
I don't think the general fund has ever paid for basic Tifa infrastructure. I don't recall that. Sometimes Tifa paid a portion of bonds and they were bonded. But it has never been a practice. Because when you take general fund money, what you're doing is you're pushing up local taxes. And Tifa was there to put in and maintain the infrastructure, basically, and then do other quality enhancements, quality of life enhancements, if there was discretionary money left. But at minimum, Tifa was supposed to pay for the basic Tifa, the very essential basic Tifa projects. And it is possible to do that simply by not doing, there's like $25,000, $30,000 for a pump station, for example, which probably doesn't need to be done this year, if it hasn't been done yet. There's also $50,000 fund balance. And, well, it's continuing projects reserve. It's not really fund balance. And there's also $100,000 put in there to look forward towards FY17, FY18, Michigan Avenue projects, which could partially be done in the spring and then partially be done next summer. So simply by looking at it and scheduling it properly, you could, do the essential infrastructure.
But potentially the Tifa board may be making some other recommendations to do some other projects. So if those funds are now tied up into, that's where I'm concerned, is that what you're proposing is that we would forego some projects into the future, but those projects may not be able to be done in the future if the recommendations from the Tifa board or the task force decides to say we should move these funds towards a more economic development type approach instead of some aspect. And that's where I'm concerned,
Well,
is
are
that the
those
TIFA board
essential
really needs to look at it.
infrastructure or are those discretionary projects?
Well, but also the TIFA is supposed to be able to enhance it again, so.
Let's do this, because we're not going to,
Tie it up.
regrettably, we're not going to solve this issue this evening. Why don't, Mr. Gearbaugh, as the, well, you're not technically a council liaison, but you're a council member who serves on the LDFA TIFA task force. I think there's some merit in bringing up and directly articulating some of Mr. Burgoyne's concerns, which I'm assuming we can do at the next meeting.
Right.
I'm not a member, but sometimes I attend. You can have a discussion about that, and then, of course, there would be a subsequent discussion with the entire TIFA board about how best to move forward.
Yeah.
But we can make sure that your concerns and thoughts are articulated, and that there's a discussion that follows that articulation. Did you want to move on, Mr. Burgoyne, to the, I believe it's goal session?
Yes. It seems to me that with the type of scheduling that we have with these goals, we're sort of leading from behind. We're not completing the goal sessions and getting it put together and preparing it prior to the budgets. And it seems to me that what we should do is we should have whatever new council members there are come on board in January, go through the budget process, and at the end of the budget process in June and July, we shall have goal setting, which would then be cleaned up and by Thanksgiving or so presented to staff, so that staff, you could lead from the front instead of leading from behind. Right now what we do is we let staff put the budgets together, put all of the plans and development and so forth, and propose things. And then by February or March, things come out from the city council. So it seems to me that it's out of order.
Well, of course, for the benefit of those on the dais and those in the audience, of course, Mr. Burgoyne and I had a thoughtful discussion about this issue several weeks back when we had lunch together, and he obviously feels very strongly about this issue. I respectfully disagree. I think that it's important to begin work on the goals, our goals and objectives, for the upcoming calendar fiscal year shortly after the election. That's why we scheduled our first goal and strategy session a week from this Saturday, which will include our outgoing council member Peters and our new, or we expect that Ms. Cybo Koenig will be our new councilwoman. And then we have a subsequent follow-up meeting in December. I think that has proved successful and prudent for this council and for this city for a number of years, in fact, since my tenure on council began. And I think it's important to establish goals and objectives because I think they assist with the development of a budget. So I understand that you feel differently, Mr. Burgoyne. I feel that the process we have in place works and it's appropriate. However, I would be interested in hearing from the rest of council how they feel on this issue.
That's not a proper representation of what I said. I said the same thing. I said it's important to establish goals for the development of a budget. That's what I said. And then somehow you said I didn't say that. What happens is that we have meetings in November, December. It takes until February or March by the time these things are cleaned up and they come out. By then, and in January, the staff puts together the programs and the budgets for the proposed programs and budgets and so forth. It would be best if there was a communication from the city council in the summer, fall to the staff so that right after Christmas, when the staff develops the plans and proposals and so forth for the following year, they could rely on the message that came from the city council. I'm saying it's behind. Things are reversed right now. The the plans and the proposals and so forth come out from staff, and then in February or March, the message comes out from the city council. That doesn't make sense to me. The message should come from the city council first about this time, about this time in the fall, around November. And then when the plans and the proposals are put together by staff by January, by the end of January or so, they could rely on a message that had come from the city council. I'm saying it's out of order. I'm not saying there should not be a message from the city council. I'm not saying there should not be goals, but I'm saying the timing is reversed.
Well, I apologize if I'm being obtuse, but you've thoroughly confused me this evening. So tell me specifically, and I guess as if I were a 2-year-old, what kind of change you're recommending?
Well, I would recommend for this year that we use the existing goals that came out in March. And I would recommend that in the following year, that by June-ish, there be meetings of the city council and to develop the ideas for the future. And between June, July, August, September, those things would be resolved and they'd be packaged. And by this time in the year, the message would go to the city, to the staff. And then a month or two later, the staff would put together their proposals and so forth, but they would do it based on a message that came from the city council. Right now, the staff puts together the proposals and plans and proposed budgets in January, and the message reaches them 60 days later or 90 days later, which is out of order. It seems as though the message should come first from the city council prior to the staff putting together plans and proposals and budgets. Out of order. It's not in right chronological order.
I think we do that. So, Mr. Rhodes?
I was just going to say there may be some merit to some of Mr. Burgoyne's comments in that I think it's appropriate that council establish the goals for the upcoming budget year in time for city departments to react to those particular goals. And it may be that, but I would like to see those goals happen as close to the beginning preparation of the next budget year as possible. And so it may well be that starting in November is still okay as long as we move the process through much faster than what we seem to have done in the past. And I think that would alleviate Mr. Burgoyne's concerns.
I would agree if those can be done by Christmas and packaged and finished. And to that end, I also think that it's unnecessary and unuseful to have a consultant. I think we could just take last year's goals and refine them slightly and just, it has been done that way. I've seen in other communities. It has been faster, and these goals are really, really long. I've often seen them a lot shorter. But, you know, that's another issue I have with the goals. I think we could do it better and faster and cheaper in-house.
Okay, well, first to Mr. Rhodes' point, I agree with that. I think there's merit in getting this done sooner as opposed to later. That requires us all to be attentive and focused and choose our words and our statements very carefully. I suspect by your comments this evening, Mr. Burgoyne, you agree with that. However, I would remind you that it was at your urging that we scheduled a third goal and strategy session last year. So one of the reasons why there was a delay, which is fine, was because you were one of the people that recommended we have a subsequent meeting. So if the intent and the goal is to get these done sooner as opposed to later, we all need to be on the same page. We all need to choose our statements and share our thoughts very strategically so that the process doesn't become protracted. To your second point, and again, you and I have discussed this, I think it's very important to have an outside party present to facilitate and moderate, so that one person or a select group of people don't dominate, and that everyone's voice is heard, and that the process continues to move forward in a productive way. So you have articulated as a desire to do it all in-house and not to have a consultant. I respectfully disagree. I would be interested, though, in hearing the perspective of my council colleagues. Mr. Roth?
I agree with Mr. Rhodes out. I think we can get things done much faster. And with our meeting that was scheduled middle of November, I don't understand why we can't reach the goal by getting it finished by the end of the year.
My question, however, is, are you in favor of having a consultant facilitate?
Well, the consultant definitely can help, but I think he maybe change some of his approaches that we can be right on target quicker.
Okay. Mr. Gearbaugh?
I don't have a problem with the consultant because I think it is good to have a facilitator that's a little more neutral and basically can bring us on track. As to the budget process, I'm pretty much sure that our schedule that we currently have is fine. If we're using November, December to produce basically our goals and ideas for the year, January through February to give some information to the staff so they can develop, and then we use March through May to basically wrap up the whole budget process. I know from my own perspective, because I run on the similar type of budget period at the university, I'm having to get everything done by December so that we can submit it in early January so that then it can be modified and have our meetings in late February to March. So from my perspective, I also want to remember that staff have a lot to do. And so whatever we do, it's council's direction to make sure it gets done in time, not staff. So I want to make sure that whatever we do, we don't hold them accountable for not being able to get them the information to which they can develop their plans and get back to us, because we can't turn this thing around in a half a month and then expect them to be able to get everything else done.
Thank you, Mr. Gearbaugh. Mr. Rhodes?
It's most often beneficial to have a third-party facilitator.
Ms. Tahar?
Strongly support having a third-party facilitator.
Okay. Mr. Peters?
No, I don't think we need a facilitator.
Okay. So I hear two in favor of doing it in-house, and I believe that the majority of council believes in having a facilitator. Okay? Is there anything else on this topic? No, then we'll move on to our final discussion item, which is water and sewer. Mr. Burgoyne.
Yeah, I just had two questions on this. We're having a water and sewer study, and that study is based on gathering the data for the study, which by now must be in process or pretty close to done. In terms of the baseline data, what is the model's annual growth of customer base? That's one question. And the other question is, what is the model's number that's going to be used for the capital reserves, sewer and water? Sewer and water in 1987, water didn't have as much capital on the books, but now water and sewer have quite a lot, like 45, 50 million on the books together. So what is the number that's being used in the model?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As far as we don't have those numbers at this point, we'll certainly can get those. As far as the growth factor and then the amount of capital reserve, whether it's the same as we currently have or if we need to increase that. So that's one of the items in this, is to evaluate that. So we can certainly provide that. I don't have that number off the top of my head currently.
Yeah, evaluating that is part of the inputs. So you need to have the inputs to do the model. So I assume it would be early. So maybe by next meeting, you would have that.
We have our kickoff meeting tomorrow instead of.
Oh, I see. You haven't
So we
started.
haven't even started.
Okay.
We can give you an update, though, at the next meeting, at a bare minimum. Anything else, Mr. Burgoyne?
No.
Okay. Mr. Campbell, you had something real quick?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just real briefly, reference to the fiscal year strategic planning retreat. There's some preparation materials that I handed out. It's the department SWOT analysis, as well as a brief memo from Mr. Petrock, and that is actually he'll be emailing that out. So it's a fillable form. So there's just some brief questions on that to provide some input, so we can be better prepared for that kickoff meeting on the 16th. So I'll please review that, and any questions, comments, please forward those to me. I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Anything else? No, then we move on to public comments. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time and make comment or question to City Council. This public comment period will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested, but not required, to state his or her name and address for the record. Are there any citizen comments? Any other business to come before Saline City Council this evening? Well, it'll get to that. We have upcoming meetings, November 18th at 7:30, unless I receive a consensus from a majority of council to have a work meeting to discuss health care benefits for the upcoming year. And then we have our regular meeting at 7:30 on December 2nd. Now entertain a motion to convene into closed session to consider material exempt from discussion or disclosure by state or federal statute. In particular, discuss strategy connected with the negotiation of a collective bargaining agreement. The City Council will reconvene into regular session at the conclusion of the closed session. Is there a motion?
Motion to convene and reconvene afterwards in open session.
Okay, it's been moved by Burgoyne to convene into closed session and then return into regular session. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Roth. The clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Rhodes?
Yes.
Councilmember Tahar?
Yes.
Councilmember Gerbach?
Yes.
Councilmember Peters?
Yes.
Councilmember Roth?
Yes.
Councilmember Burgoyne?
Yes.
Mayor Marl?
Yes. So we have adjourned into closed session at 9:12 p.m. Okay, I would seek a motion at this time to end the closed session and return into a regular open meeting. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Tahar, seconded by Mr. Gearbaugh. The clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Rhodes?
Yes.
Councilmember Tahar?
Yes.
Councilmember Gerbach?
Yes.
Councilmember Peters?
Yes.
Councilmember Roth?
Yes.
Councilmember Burgoyne?
Yes.
Mayor Marl?
Yes. So we have reconvened into regular session at 9:30 p.m. The last motion of the evening is item 13-177. This is Teamsters Local 214 agreement. This will be a motion to ratify or not ratify a tentative collective bargaining agreement dated August the 21st, 2013 between the Teamsters and the City of Saline as ratified by Teamsters Local 214. Is there a motion?
Move to ratify.
Second.
Moved by Tahar to ratify, seconded by Mr. Gearbaugh. Discussion. Mr. Burgoyne.
The non-union, the police, and the Teamsters over the past few years have not had the same wage and, cost of living benefit increases, the same types of benefits and so forth. So I'm wondering, at some point, I think it'd be useful for us to see when changes have taken place. It's my thought that the non-union staff actually took more cuts first and longer. And it'd be useful for us to know that distinction, because it would be good for us to try to get equity between the various divisions. And I'm for ratification right now, but this is just a thought.
Sure, sure. So that's information that's readily available, and we can certainly compile that and distribute it to everyone on council. And I do believe, Mr. Burgoyne, that it would be a useful tool for future decision making. To your point about creating parity between the Teamsters, the police, the sergeants, and our non-union folks, that's absolutely our intent and our goal. However, as you know from your years of municipal experience, it's easier said than done. However, I think as you alluded to, this a tentative collective bargaining agreement and the ones we recently ratified with the sergeants and with the police officers are important steps in the right direction. I think they assist in improving the overall financial health and well-being of the city, and therefore I enthusiastically endorse this motion and urge my colleagues to vote in the affirmative. Is there subsequent discussion? Excuse me. No, that's been properly moved by Tahar, seconded by Gearbaugh to ratify. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries. If there's nothing further, I would seek a motion to adjourn this regular council meeting at 9:34 p.m.
So moved.
Moved by Gearbaugh to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Tahar. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. This meeting's adjourned.